there tends to be this sort of pop psychology edict that says, like, figure out what you want to do, and then anyone who disagrees with you, just like jettison them from your life. If you're not happy doing what you're doing, go turn in your resignation today, walk away from it, like just go do the thing that, and people have no idea what the underlying impulse is that would let them do it, which is going to be a massive problem in the next 36 months as 20 to 50% of the people, do this thing that they're calling the great resignation. And then they're going to end up in the great regret because they had no idea how to make a better decision. But it's, and the bigger reality is that if you're 18 years old or 20 years old and the stakes are really low and you got your life ahead of you and no responsibilities, awesome. But if you're you or me, or if you're in the middle of your life and you have people looking to you for stability and support and you have responsibilities, the notion that you would follow that advice to me is so destructive.
Yeah, there's so much collateral damage with that.
So much collateral damage. And we tend to dramatically overestimate the giddiness that we'll feel when we do it and underestimate the pain of the disruption that we cause. And then when we land in it, we're like, oh, wow, this is not what I thought was coming my way, because we didn't do it in a way that was really intelligent. I'm not entirely against like the big disruption, but to me, it's the action of last resort rather than the first step in.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more, and you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Jonathan Fields, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy. Rule number 2, learn to handle conflicts.
When I think about handling conflict, and it's interesting that the topic wasn't actually set up as resolving conflict, but rather handling conflict. I think it's because we all deal with it, and the way that we step into conflict really is something that determines in no small part how we experience our days and our lives, because there's opportunity for it around us more or less all day, all the time. Conflicts also bring incredible opportunities for possibility and for resolution. And I think that's what we're all looking for when we think about conflict, is how do I resolve this? And the good news, bad news is that many times it can be resolved in really powerful, constructive, positive, healthy ways. Sometimes, you get to a point where you do what you need to do, you say what you need to say, you engage in the way that feels aligned with who you are, your values and beliefs, and you still don't come to a really satisfying resolution. And it's about how you stepped into the process that allows you to step back out of it in a way that makes you feel still in integrity. And I was really thinking about this because I think, there are so many different common rules and like ways to approach and tenets and principles. And I'll probably share some of those that you may have heard from others and maybe from other growth coaches. I'll probably share a bit of a different take as well. That as we come into the second half of our coaching session today, I'm actually going to share what I call my 7 rules of engagement. But before we get there, what I want to talk about is something a little bit different, something that I feel like is really, really relevant and important to any conflict situation, but we often don't think about. And because we don't think about it, we don't have the opportunity to understand how it influences any particular interaction, and then how to work with certain elements of conflict in a way that allows us to create the structure, the container that would create the most meaningful and positive and mutual outcome for those involved. And that thing that I want to talk about is something I call modes of engagement. And there are these 4 modes of engagement that are a part of not just every conflict, but every way that we actually step into and interact with other human beings. We can engage in these 4 different levels. And they are massively important to our ability to just flourish as human beings. But they really, really come into play in a powerful way in conflict situations.
Rule number 3, be resilient.
The way that I think about resilience when I think about it is the ability to move through moments and sometimes entire seasons of adversity so that the experience of moving through it, the experience of interacting with it, the experience of dancing with it is something where you can access the greatest amount of equanimity, of peace and ease during the experience. I was thinking about what's the strongest experience that I've had where I've had to be incredibly resilient. And I kind of was focusing on business. So we actually run two companies, and one of them is a media company. And we produce this flagship podcast called Good Life Project. We've been doing it for years. We actually started as a video show, filming on location with a crew and cameras. And we transitioned 2 years into that to become pure audio, just a podcast. And we air twice a week. So we have a very aggressive production schedule. I made a commitment very early on that we were not only going to create the most extraordinary production values that we could, but also the most intimate, the most real, the most open, honest, and revelatory conversations that we could do. We built a place to actually host this where I controlled the entire environment. I would invite people in and they would come in and we would close the door behind them. And we'd sit in these two really comfy chairs with this super plush rug in a pretty intimate setting and with headphones on so we could hear each other in our ears and we could see each other. We're looking at each other. That in-person format, for me, it was sacred. So we're 6 years into this format. We're known for hosting these intimate in-person things where you can literally hear the occasional siren coming through the studio, like the 4 layers of acoustic glass. And my belief, I have this deeply held belief that we cannot host the quality and the depth of conversation that I am comfortable producing if we have to do it remotely. And then all of a sudden, a year ago hits. We had a quick meeting with the team and said, okay, we can't do this anymore. We can't, this thing that we've held so sacred, our entire business, our pride, my ego, the brand was built around the extraordinary quality of the conversations and the production value of being in a studio, being up close with these really super high quality microphones and no echo and things like that. We had to make a decision because we were faced with mass disruption. And remember last year, everything kind of hit New York very early in the year. And New York just started to shut down everything. It was like the dominoes were falling in everything. Within a matter of days, the entire city is just shutting down. And we're thinking to ourselves, okay, so if we stick to this ethos, we're going to go on hiatus, or we're literally going to shut down the company and the community and the podcast. And we had other shows that we had started to work on developing as well. So the choice was, we didn't want this level of disruption. We didn't ask for it. We didn't see it coming. Nobody saw it coming. But here it is. This is adversity on the extreme level where it effectively had the potential to take out my entire business. But also, it made me kind of rethink, what are the assumptions? What are the assumptions that have gotten me to this place? And how can I change those assumptions? How can I respond to it? How can I see the possibility side of what's happening here and not just feel like I'm being pummeled all day, every day by the disruption, by the adversity? Because that's the heartbeat of resilience, is being able to see the other story in the face of adversity.
Rule number 4, don't set yourself up for failure.
There's a certain line of thought that says the ultimate aspiration is to be happy. So we should aspire to just live a happy life. And if you ask the average parent, what do you want for your kid? They're going to say, I want them to be happy. But the reality is, if you know that it's not a persistent state, it's a moment that we pass through, here and there, and which is awesome. But to expect to live there, to dwell in that state, is setting yourself up for futility and failure, and for many, a sense of shame because you haven't lived up to the expectation that you've been told is possible. It's not. So there's research that actually shows the direct pursuit of happiness leaves you less happy. You do other things that are meaningful, that are relational, and a side benefit is it will increase or relate the net happiness. But the other part of that equation that's not often talked about is that in the context of happiness in particular, similar to sort of like metabolism and other physiological markers, it's pretty commonly accepted at this point that happiness is in part at least based on genetic set point. I've seen data that says anywhere between 40 and 60% of your sort of like average set point for happiness is based on genetics, right? So if you happen to be wired to just be more on the melancholy side, and then the world around you is telling you that to be okay, you actually need to be like, yay, all day long, that you need to be like, exist at a 75% happy, but you're wired like to, and you're kind of okay being like, just who you are, but you're being told that means you're broken. Well, then you feel even more broken rather than just saying, actually, I'm okay with myself. So I'm fascinated by the world of happiness and how you look at the research and then you look at how that's been translated into common perception and edicts and prescriptions and how there's a lot that's gone missing in the middle. And ultimately, sure, I want to be happy. I want my kid to be happy. I want my friends to be, I want you to be happy, right? But more than that, I want you to feel like you matter. I want you to feel like what you're doing is meaningful. I want you to feel like you're surrounded by relationships that nourish you at the end of the day and you're making a difference. I want you to feel like there's something inside of you that makes you open your eyes in the morning. And if you exert effort in alignment with it, you just feel good, even if you have no understanding of why, and you figured that out, and then you figured out a way to actually contribute to the world that lets you do that. That's what matters to me.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, reinvent yourself.
Reinventing your life, reinventing yourself, reinventing your career, reinventing your relationships, reinventing your state of mind, state of well-being. And I kept asking myself, is that really what we're striving for? And as our community here knows, for any of you that have seen me sort of in these sessions before, I tend to be a bit of a contrarian, or I have an alternate take on a lot of different ideas. And I think my invitation today is to ask yourself, do you really need to reinvent your life? What we're seeing now is this incredible impulse after a number of years where people are feeling stifled and repressed in a lot of ways, and then generations and decades of genuine stifling and repression and oppression. And there's sort of like a pressure valve that needs to be released. And we're sort of saying, I just need to blow everything up and start over. We're seeing it in a really big way in the world of work and careers, which is where a lot of my focus has been. And you cannot listen to or watch or read anything in the context of work or business where the phrase great resignation isn't popping up in some meaningful way on a pretty regular basis now. And so there's this really powerful impulse towards reinvention. But part of my question is that actually the right move for us? And if it is the right move, is it the right first move, or is it actually much better positioned as the final move in a chain of things that we might explore before we get to the point of sort of like the big reinvention, the big blowing it up, the big disruption? Because that process of reinvention involves a lot of disruption, and it will also very necessarily involve a certain amount of pain, a certain amount of grief, a certain amount of massive recreation, a certain amount of creative destruction in the name of creative construction. And sometimes that's what we have to do to feel the way that we want to feel, right? But I think my invitation today is actually to look at this a little bit differently And before you say yes to just a wholesale reinvention, an explosion of what is, and a reassembling of the fractal pieces into something profoundly different and new, what I'm going to invite you to do is first think about a series of other things. Think about reframing, think about acceptance, think about savoring, reimagining, and realigning before you reinvent. Embrace a process of waking up, optimizing, and maybe even evolution rather than reinvention.
Rule number 6, establish quality relationships.
It's the quality and depth of the relationships that we form that really make life extraordinary on so many levels. When I think about the work that I've been doing for probably about 2 decades now, and Brendan's been doing, so many of us that have this amazing privilege of being here with you, it's really looking at these big questions. And no matter where you look, this idea of relationships and how we relate to other people, it just keeps coming back to the center of the stage. And with good reason. It's that important. There's a ton of data that now shows that, but we don't need data. We know that intuitively. And if we had questioned that in any way, shape, or form, this last 16 months have pretty much reminded people how important other people are to them and their lives, to their happiness, to their sense of flourishing, their sense of connectedness. It's been a bit of a relationship cauldron to a certain extent. And I'm not just talking about intimate partners or life partners. I'm talking about on every possible level, whether it's work relationships, professional relationships, friendship relationships, enemy relationships, compassionate relationships, companionate relationships, romantic relationships. Everything has sort of been put under the microscope recently, and we've been tested in really big ways. I know it's been interesting for me. So I have worked from home for many years now, and I actually work full-time with my wife, Stephanie, and we play different roles in our company, and our entire team is distributed literally around the country and even internationally. So we've had to learn how to work in these kind of weird different modes that a lot of the world has been forced to switch to in the last year and a half or so. And we kind of figured, okay, so this is going to take some figuring out, but we kind of have it dialed in already. We didn't really know. There was a lot of work to do. And then we're working at home. And it also is very different. We spent the better part of last year in New York City, which was a tough place to be for the first 3/4 of the year. And then our daughter, who was in college, ended up having to leave early and come home. And we found ourselves, the 3 of us, married with my wife and with my daughter there, working full time with my wife in the apartment, with my daughter sort of like exiled from school and home and then doing school remotely. And us in a situation, especially the early part of last year, where none of us felt like we could leave home. None of us could see anybody else. We couldn't interact with other human beings. So it was a very different experience that we really were not prepared to. But at the same time, as challenging as it was, as much as it brought up the powerful invitation to revisit how we interact with each other, how we relate to each other, how we can continue to cohabit a finite space in a way that feels both sacred and respectful, while being nourishing and alive and vibrant, and also allowing us to have our own places to go to. It's been a really interesting test. I used that word cauldron before, and I think a lot of us have felt that. And what's kind of funny is we ended up moving out to Colorado in September of last year, where we were for 9 months. And then because we wanted to see some friends and come back for a little bit, the 3 of us just wedged ourselves into a car. We essentially took everything that we owned, got rid of a whole bunch of stuff, and sort of sealed ourselves into a Subaru with a cargo box up on top, and literally just drove over a period of a week, the 2,000 or so miles cross country back where we're actually kind of hanging out right now in a little cottage you can probably see behind me in Western Massachusetts. And that drive was sort of the, it was the final test for us. Could we actually, having figured out how to be together in this confined space in a confined world, could we then spend a week together in a car, literally wedged into a place because there was no room to move in this car anywhere, and be okay. And we were. It actually was kind of a fun, powerful experience. And it's reminded me so much about the important parts of life and the important parts of how to be with other people in a way that no matter what the circumstances happening around you bring you, the interrelational part of what's happening still stays healthy. It still stays constructive and generative.
Rule number 7, develop discipline.
When Brennan came to me and he's like, hey, I said, what's the theme for like the upcoming month? And he's like, focus and discipline. And I'm thinking to myself, that's great because I have none of either. But at the same time, somehow I managed to get a lot of stuff done on any given day. But I started to realize a couple of years back that discipline, that getting astonishing things done, that accomplishing, achieving at the highest level, it was not just an inside game and not just an outside game. It was a blended game. And that so many of us focus on one particular thing. And we end up realizing that we're doing one thing well, we're doing one thing poorly, but we're not getting where we want to go. We don't have the discipline to do it. We don't have the focus to do it. We keep wandering off. And we become really good starters and really terrible finishers. And I know nobody here, of course. I'm talking about myself. When you look at the people who've actually, the world views as having astonishing focus and astonishing discipline and who are able to accomplish incredible things, that there are some commonalities with them. Now, my mind kind of works in frameworks. So I started to really deconstruct a lot of my own experiences, the opportunity that I've had to sit down with hundreds of some of the most accomplished people from literally every domain of life, and then pour into the academic research on everything from goal setting to achievement, to focus, to attention and things like that, and developed my own framework. And I call it success scaffolding. Now, that scaffolding, think of it as this is a superstructure that you build both around you in your environment, in your relationships, and it's also an infrastructure. It's a structure that you build in your mind, in your body, and they work together to allow you to accomplish astonishing things. They effectively install focus and discipline. And by doing that, they help the likelihood that you're actually going to show up and accomplish amazing things. They help that become your reality. So let's dive into it. We hear these words discipline, we hear the word grit out in the world a lot. I've had the opportunity to sit down in conversation with the primary researcher on grit, Angela Duckworth, a number of times over the years and really go deep into it. And we hear that, it's this thing that people either have or they don't have, similar to you either have focus or you have discipline or you don't have it. And what we started to realize is that's actually not entirely true at all. That a lot of this stuff is practicable, it's buildable, it's installable. So first one is picture, right? So we want to create a picture of the thing that we want to accomplish or do or the place we want to go. Large or small, it really doesn't matter. A lot of times we think about that thing we want to accomplish and we kind of keep it spinning in our minds, right? But we never memorialize it in any meaningful way. And the problem is when we never memorialize it, we don't entirely know what we're working towards. We don't know what it looks like, what it feels like, what it'll be like when we're there, what the fundamental qualities of it will be. So we never really truly understand what is the first step in, because we're not clear exactly on what it is that we want to move towards. So one of the first things we want to do is to create a picture of this thing that we want to move towards or accomplish. So for me, if that's a book, so I literally just turned in the next book a couple of weeks ago, for me, that was getting really, really clear on what this book is going to be. What's the theme? What's the big idea? What's the promise? What are the core ideas and the supporting ideas? But I'm also somebody who's hyper visual. I don't know about you, and I'm a maker. I make ideas manifest. That's my sparketype or archetype or impulse for work that makes me come alive. So I needed to go a step further and really envision what does the physical object look like? And that actually helped me sit down and figure out how I'm going to start working on this thing. So when you create that picture in your mind, you want to do two things: be specific and be sensory. Again, this is all in the mind map. So be specific and be sensory. Be as clear and as granular and as specific as you can get. Behavioral psychologist at Stanford, BJ Fogg, calls this crispifying the idea. Make it really crisp, right? Super clear. It's like you're taking a lens on a camera that's out of focus and turning it so everything comes into super clear focus, and you have a lot of specificity in what you're doing. And then make it sensory. Give it sound, give it a visual, give it motion, give it scent, if that's what you want. Make it tactile. What does it feel like? Right? So create this picture, make it as much as you can. If you literally have a camera and you have a sense, people do this all the time now. They create boards, whether you call them pin boards or vision boards or whatever it is, to actually get as detailed, as granular, as visual, and as sensory as you can. You want to create a picture which is detailed enough that it makes you start to feel things. And that becomes really important because your brain actually is a little bit like a GPS. Neuroscientist who works out of Harvard and Harvard Medical School professor Srini Pillai says that when you get super clear on this thing that you want to move towards, create, or achieve, that it becomes like this implanted GPS in your brain. Your neurocircuits actually start to work on the steps that will get you there without you even having any understanding of the fact that your brain is now working 24/7 on getting there.
Rule number 8, seek satisfaction in your work.
We're entering a moment of existential questioning that I don't think either of us have seen in our lifetime. It happens after major wars. It happened for me after 9/11, especially as a New Yorker. But at a scale that is happening now where nobody is left out of this questioning.
And why do you think that is? Do you think that is happening now because of the confluence of COVID and the political climate and what social media is doing to us and climate change? It's the combination of all of these
I think it's a confluence
sort of existential things that we're dealing with.
I think it's a confluence of a global health crisis that made it clear to so many people, to most people, that nobody gets to just sign away a document or pay their way out of this. Maybe that's not entirely true. Privilege has definitely played a role in outcomes and access, but that we're all affected in a really profound way. The complete decimation of the structure of work as we know it, and everybody, so many people, there's class differences in work now. There's, remote work now. There's all sorts of things where work has been turned upside down in so many ways that the ground beneath us from a work context has been completely destroyed. Mm-hmm.
Including the social power dynamic behind
absolutely.
it.
And then at the same time, we've got deep questioning and disruption and change thinking on big societal questions that has had to happen for a really, really long time. It's been really interesting to see how you've been approaching that in the context of the conversations you've been having here also. And so I think we're in this state of, like you said, it's the confluence of disruption in nearly every part of our lives that gives us a feeling of groundlessness that's forcing us to question, what do we want the next season of our lives to look like and to feel like? And a lot of people are starting to realize that they don't entirely know what the answer is, but what they do know is not the way I've been feeling.
Mm-hmm. And the gift, of course, is the opportunity to reframe that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to take it and say, okay, so, if that's the negative, what's the negative to the negative? What's the positive? What do I want to create in this next season moving mm-hmm. forward? How do I want to move into it? How do I want to feel? How do I want to contribute to my life, to the lives of those around us? What matters to me? It's all tied up. And I think the earlier crisis, 9/11, a certain group of people felt that. 2008, 2009, the financial collapse, a certain group of people felt that. Some of the major global wars and crises in generations mm-hmm. that generally were different from ours felt that. This, in my mind, is one of the first times where so many people are feeling it on so many different parts of their lives simultaneously. And at the same time, because the structure of work was blown up, and a lot of people are realizing, okay, it was really tough to figure this out in the beginning, but now I kind of like it. I don't want to go back. Mm-hmm. And I'm massively burned out from trying to actually sustain myself. I don't want to go back to the way things were. And like you said, the question then becomes, okay, so then where are we going from here?
Right.
Rule number 9, use the 3-bucket system.
I look at life as 3 buckets. Your contribution, which is fundamentally how you bring your gifts to the world. And that may be work for some people, but it also may not be work for some people. And that's actually okay, which is something that's been an evolution for me to sort of like find that place. Connection, which is it's the relationship between you and friends, family, loved ones, colleagues, source, if that's something, however you define that, whether it's God, whether it's the field, whatever it may be to you, if that's something that's meaningful to you, your natural environment as well. And the 3rd bucket is vitality, and it's the state of your mind and body. And the one thing that's also really crystal clear these days is that there is no state of mind and no state of body as separate entities. Mm-hmm. It's one completely, interwoven feedback mechanism. Right. So, like, if you're bummed, you're very likely going to feel physical pain, and that may well manifest in actual physical illness. And if you feel physical pain, it's going to affect your state of mind. So, so it's really about how do we optimize those systems. So the model is really simple. Mm-hmm. You wake up every day.
Contribution,
connection, and vitality, right? And you wake up every day and you just say, okay, these 3 buckets need to be full for me to be living a good life. And so every day you kind of do like a check. I call it a snapshot. Say, okay, like, how am I feeling this morning? Like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied am I with my level of my contribution bucket? Do I feel like I'm leveraging all of my strengths and working in alignment with my values and beliefs? And am I lit up in the way that I'm bringing myself to the world? Am I contributing in a way that's deeply meaningful to me? Like, on a 1 to 10, like, how full is that bucket? Same thing with connection. Like, do I feel like I'm kind of isolated and pulled away from my friends and the people that I love? Or do I feel like I'm really dialed in and like, and my relationships are just welling over. Mm-hmm. So, and then every day, taking that really quick check and then deciding, okay, I'm going to do a little something today to address one of these buckets.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is bring positive emotions.
Positive emotion. Now, when you say positive emotion, a lot of times what people will kind of immediately translate that to is the word happiness. And in fact, in the early days in the research in the world around positive psychology, a huge amount was focused on this word happiness. And in fact, the thing that probably put the field of positive psychology on the sort of like the popular map was about a decade of books that came out of that world. There was a lot of the leading researchers and professors who translated their research into books that in some way, shape, or form had happiness in the names and the titles and the covers. It was all about the pursuit of happiness. And what a lot of people learned over time was that the direct pursuit of happiness actually in the literature tends to make most people less happy than when they started. They start to realize that there are all sorts of other emotions that really matter, that when you pursue them have the side effect of happiness. And these are emotions like joy. They're emotions like love. There are emotions like hope and compassion. There are emotions like appreciative joy. There are things like bemusement and amusement and laughter. There are things like gratitude. What we learned over time is that there's a full suite of positive emotion that when we allow ourselves to experience it, when we invite them into our lives, they add up to astonishing feelings. It's not just about the direct pursuit of happiness. Happiness usually is the emotion. It's almost like a catch-all experience that tends to ensue after or as the side effect of the direct pursuit of these other types of experiences. And there's one other thing that's kind of important to realize when we're talking about positive emotion. When we say positive emotion, like I want to bring more positive emotion into my life, more joy, more appreciation, more hope, more love and compassion, we're not actually saying, and I'm going to strive to eliminate anything that is not that from my life. And it's a little bit of a misnomer. We kind of think, well, the whole idea is to put so much positive stuff into my life that it squeezes out the opportunity for me to feel anything but positive emotion. And on the one hand, you're like, well, that's got to be the goal, right? I mean, how could that be anything but good? Interestingly, that's not the truth. That's not the reality. What the research shows us is that we need negative emotion to go along with our positive emotion. I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but the idea is that when you never have anything as a contrast to the positive emotion that you're experiencing, it's harder to actually know when you're in the positive emotion because you don't have anything to contrast it with. What we know now is that when you step into your life, when you relate to the world, when you actively seek to bring things into your experience that have the possibility to bring both positive emotion and at times negative emotion, that it is the full spectrum of emotion that allows a positive emotion to have power and contrast and potential in your life. So we call that emodiversity, allowing for a diversity of emotions to fill our experience. But of course, we're looking to tip the scales much more substantially towards the positive emotion side than the negative. But I think it's just important to also note that the goal is not to just completely eliminate any kind of negative emotion from your life, because we actually need it there to create the contrast, to understand when the positive emotion is happening, and also that it is in fact positive. The other thing is this: the quest to try and eliminate all negative emotion from your life is actually an impossible quest. There is no possible way to make that happen. You can't remove grief from your life. At some point, we are all going to experience some kind of grief. It could be large-scale grief. It could be passing grief. But we will all feel that at some moment throughout our lives, sometimes at multiple moments throughout our lives. We will also feel upset. We'll feel frustration. We may feel anger. We may feel hurt. Right? These are all things that if you're actually engaging in your life, if you're engaging in things that matter, if you're stepping out into the world and being active and relating to other people, you're going to experience them. And setting the goal of eliminating all negative emotion from your life actually sets an unattainable goal. And then when you realize that you failed at hitting that goal, not only have you failed at keeping the negative emotion, which is a part of your experience, out of your life, but then you judge yourself a failure. And very often we'll layer futility and shame on top of whatever natural, organic negative emotion tends to come into our lives. And that creates this sort of like destructive shame spiral, which has no business being in our experience. Like that's not something that we need to have or experience. There's not a lot of value. So there is value in certain emotions. There are other emotions that don't provide a ton of value. So that's just sort of a bit of a clarification. Striving to have as much positive emotion in your life is really important in the quest to actually have a meaningful, fulfilling, flourishing life. But it's also not about striving to completely eliminate anything that is not positive. I think I've just learned to really let go of a lot of stuff that doesn't call to me. I'm really good at starting things, and then the minute they show that they don't have legs or they're not going to make me feel the way I want to feel, letting them go. I think you kind of have to do that as an entrepreneur, as a founder. So I basically, I'm really good at starting things, trying them, treating them as experiments, and then as soon as they show they don't have legs, letting them go. And I've done that a lot. But my main company, Good Life Project, at the time, it's really been running for almost a decade. We have good systems, we have great people, so that I have a certain amount of freedom to do other things. And the work around the Sparketypes became something that I was really just deeply drawn to. So
you were sparked to do.
Yeah, I was. And fundamentally, when you have that state, you become a lot more efficient. You function at a different level. You lose yourself in flow with so much more ease, and you feel a sense of meaning and purpose. So that fuels you, that keeps you going, that gives you energy, and the very state that I was investigating and trying to map and define and build tools around was the state that I was in when I was doing this work. So it allowed me, to deepen into it and to still feel really good doing it. And, but there were definitely moments that have been hard where, there's a lot going on. And I felt like I've definitely pushed a little bit too far over the edge of not being happy, and I'm doing too much at once. So I'm sort of like regularly titrating that and figuring out how do I pull back, or how do I bring different people onto the team where everything can hum on a different level. But it's definitely been it's been a fairly big lift. Now once these things start to really demonstrate a lot of power. In 2018, we built an assessment, spent almost an entire year building this archetype assessment. We launched it out into the world. And when we saw the response to it, like as I have this conversation with you, we're probably closing in on 600,000 people having completed this assessment, like over 30 million data points. It became really clear that it was its own thing and its own body of work, and it would need its own tools and devotion and team. So we split it into its own company. So I'm now effectively running two companies, Good Life Project and Spark Endeavors, with their own teams. And that is not the happiest place for me, to be honest. So like I'm in a window right now where I have to kind of figure that out. Because, I want to be able to do more of the things that I love to do and less of the things that I don't. And when you're in a startup mode with anything, which functionally I am again, you don't necessarily have that choice. You wear hats that don't come naturally to you. You wear hats that sometimes empty you out, but it's in the name of building something you believe deeply in, still spending more time doing the things that do fill you up, and knowing that you're building something that you expect will allow you to effectively buy yourself out of the things that empty you out at a certain point. So, I'm literally in that space right now of running one company, which has been around for a decade, and building a new company from the ground up as around this body of work, which has had so much traction that is sort of like this is a thing that has to be.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video, because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from Brendon Burchard, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
Second person and third person makes you makes your self-talk more powerful. So if you're gonna do affirmations, you wouldn't just say, I want to do this, I want to do this. You want to do what we call in the book self-coaching,